Welcome everyone, my name is Manuel Martinez, and this is another episode of Career Downloads, where each episode I basically hit the refresh button, bring on a different guest, to learn more about their background and their experiences, to really uncover actionable advice that you can use as you're managing your own career. I'm excited for today's episode because I have with me Yvette Durazo, and she's not what we would consider your typical tech worker. So she specializes in conflict resolution, and she teaches at universities. She's also worked for a lot of companies. She's based in the Silicon Valley, and it's really to kind of help people who are looking to be leaders within the tech community. So she's got a lot of insights there. So I'm excited to kind of find out more about how she started, eventually what led her into this career field, and how she was able to kind of merge that and help leaders, again, within the technology sector. So with that, I'll go ahead and introduce Yvette.
Thank you, Manuel, for inviting me to your podcast and inviting me to interact with your audience and be able to be part of this movement that you're doing in educating people and helping to build their careers.
Right. And thank you again for kind of coming on. And I know that we had a couple conversations prior to this, and I think it's important because I don't know how much of this type of information, it's again, just trying to share with others. We talk about soft skills and, technical skills, and those are important. But I think things like this, like conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, and there are people that, starting out in their career, they're like, okay, well, I want to be a software developer. I want to be a project manager. But at some point, even if you're not a direct manager or leader, you're going to lead smaller teams. So understanding how to resolve conflict, I know that this would have been something that I can think of a number of situations where it would have helped me to kind of have some of that information instead of trying to learn it on the fly or after the fact.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of the people are in the tech industry. They go out and learn a field of work that it is very hard skills, right? Very intellectually and hard skills. But there are parts in the process of their career that they go in, for example, into project management because they know that somehow they will be working with teams. Or they perhaps go into getting an MBA thinking that, their career trajectory will lead them into become, leaders, managers, and going up the ladder in the organization. And the more that you go up the ladder in the organization, one of the things that is going to be something that it's going to happen and it's common is the fact that you're going to be working more with people, right?
Yes.
And it is interesting that when people going through the trajectory of learning more about project management and they go through a certificate process, little that they realize that project management leads to having to learn how to influence people. People that are working in your entire company that you're not directly managing or supervising, yet because you're responsible for a particular project, you have to learn how to influence these individuals that come to your team. And believe it or not, the project management certificate program, back in the days when I started, teaching courses in conflict resolution, I realized that project managers were not very well taught about conflict resolution. The book that is the project management book, what is the PIM box?
Yep.
I think it's called. There was only 1 or 2 pages in conflict resolution. And it is interesting that it's a field of work that you need to do with teams, with people. Eventually, I think that they realized the Project Management Institute, where I used to give a lot of my workshops, they realized that this skill is very much needed. And eventually they start upping up and bringing more people skills into this work. So in reality, what tends to happen as people grow up in their career, that is going to be the tendency, having to learn these people skills. In LinkedIn, recently did a research study into what are the skill gaps that they continue to see that it's missing in the workplace. And out of those 15 that they ended up researching, the number one skill missing was AI, right? Because right now, in the world that we are, AI is the most important.
Right.
The second one was communication, conflict resolution, how to negotiate with people. So we see through the research throughout these past 15 years that conflict resolution and be able to have those difficult conversations with people, be able to resolve human conflict has been in all of these research studies in the skill gaps that is mostly needed in the organization. And the more we progress into life, we see that it's a key skill. It's not what they used to call it a soft skill anymore. It is one of those essential skills
Right.
that is mostly needed.
And I know we're going to start getting into that, so I kind of want to save that for a little bit later in the conversation. But if you don't mind, kind of telling me a little bit about where you grew up, and then eventually kind of what led you down this path towards your career.
Sure. I was born and raised in San Diego, California. I was very lucky to be born in a border town in where I had the opportunity to be able to commingle with the two different cultures, Tijuana, Mexico, and San Diego. My father used to own a company in the other side of the border, and that was kind of like my playground as a child because I was the youngest of seven. And I used to always be with my dad because it was fascinating to be around his business and playing to be the accountant, playing to help him out in the workplace. That was my playground. And I grew up in the other side in San Diego, going to school since I was in kinder all the way until now, right? And because of the fact that I was raised in a binational border, it always caught my attention, the ability to be able to understand different cultures. In San Diego, not only you have a predominant amount of percentage of Hispanics in the population, but you also have a pretty much of a very nice melting pot of a lot of different cultures in San Diego. And that led me to, instead of choosing to become an accountant, because at that point I thought it's boring, I would like to study international business. But at the same time, I was raising kids. And the most international that I went was to be doing binational border work. And while I was doing that, that led me into working for a lot of nonprofit organizations, economic development councils, chambers of commerce, universities. And one of the things that I was constantly seeing, it was that there were well-meaning people wanting to provide volunteer work and work for these nonprofit organizations. Yet something that would happen very often, it was that people constantly will get into conflict, into ideas that people didn't agree with, and on, my youngest career, I was able to experience that. Interestingly enough, for whatever reason, people will come and approach me whenever they were having issues. And I never had the skills, yet they wanted me to hear them. They wanted me to help them out with ideas or ways of how to deal with people in the organization. And somehow become very, very trustworthy person for them. That eventually led me to wanting to go into getting a master's degree. And at first I thought, I want to get an MBA because it will go very well hand in hand with my international business degree. Maybe an MBA will be the route to go. Little that I thought about any other degree. But eventually, while I was doing research, I learned about this degree in negotiation, conflict resolution, and peace building. And I immediately felt that if I were to gain that skill, I would be able to work with a lot of people and be able to help them to do what they want to do best, which is focus in helping others, focus in, developing their careers towards doing better work, towards the movement of working with people. Because I used to enjoy working for nonprofit organizations a lot. So I saw that as an opportunity.
Did a lot of the reason that people came to you, were you a pretty outgoing person? Did you talk a lot? Like, what is it? Or were you maybe more quiet and people came to you? So I'm just curious, what made people kind of gravitate towards you and just kind of to develop that sense of trust and to think that, oh, well, you're a person that can help me solve the problem. Is it you did it once or twice and people just kind of repeated coming back to you? Or was it, you were very good at it just naturally? So I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, I was an introvert. Now I'm a hybrid. Otherwise, I couldn't do the work that I do. But as an extrovert, I was a people's person. I used to like to work with a lot of people, and then I was a connector by nature. I would see somebody that was running this business and then somebody else running that business, and I used to like to connect them. And I would say, you have to talk to this person, and that comes very natural for me. And I think that because of that, I created a trustworthy persona, and where people would say, if Yvette has the ability to see, potentiality in connecting me to develop my business or to, work in collaboration with somebody else, she probably has those skills of helping people to resolve issues, right? Because they see my willingness to be able to connect people, right? And eventually, when I went through doing my master's degree, little did I realize that indeed I was already resolving and negotiating from the cradle. Why? Because I was the youngest of 7 children, and I was the child that my parents were not expecting because they were already, in their 50s. And eventually I showed up and I had to negotiate resources, attention, and you name it. But I never realized that I had those abilities until I eventually did my master's degree, and I was doing my practice, doing internships, and that is where I realized, wow, everybody's saying that I'm very natural of doing this. So must have been because, the way I was raised, the way that I navigated through life, and then eventually I also remember when I graduated from my bachelor's and working for these nonprofit organizations, that people will gravitate to me. But at that point, I thought they gravitated towards me because I'm a connector. Yeah, I see potentiality in people and getting them connected.
And that's good to know, so that I know other people like that are just natural connectors. And that's probably why they gravitate towards you and gravitate towards those other people, is just because that does help establish trust, outside of work and even with inside work. If someone comes to you, or if you're like, hey, I know that, you're working on this project, and let me go, this person's doing something similar, or there might be a good, a good potential, right? A good synergy in there. So, just the reason I wanted to bring that about is just if someone has that natural skill, or they're used to doing that, they can understand that this might be a path forward for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then you go through and you're going to get in your master's now, and you decided, or you found out about conflict resolution and peace building. What was that like, kind of going through getting that degree, and what did you think you were going to do with it after?
Yeah, interesting. Obviously, this field study does not go directly towards a job title. And at first, obviously, I felt in love right away with the degree, but I knew that it was going to have to be an art to figure it out. How am I going to build in this degree with a career path? But at the same time, I thought, based on what I know about my field of work, and based on the fact that working in an organization and trying to do this work, sometimes it affects the level of neutrality. And we can see that in the HR field, human resource. The majority of people don't trust HR. People don't go to HR, right? And it is interesting that not a lot of the HR certificates, HR bachelors, perhaps in the master's degree, they don't teach these fundamental human skills that I learned through my master's degree. And because of the comparison to the HR field, I said, well, wouldn't it be better for me to start establishing a consulting business in where I can be a neutral in all aspects? And I can go into an organization and really help organizations to build a better culture. Versus if I were to be working in an organization and trying to do this work, probably will not work that well, because then they will box me into working for an HR department, perhaps, right? And immediately an HR department already has a reputation.
Right.
So that is where I started thinking, you know what, it would be best for me to start developing little by little my consulting work and then eventually go from that. And I knew that this was going to be a field of work that I was already in love with and that I would want to always do forever, right? I don't see a path to retirement doing the work that I do, right? Giving trainings, facilitating conversations, coaching, and doing all this work that I do. So I said, okay, let me start doing this. And I started developing my logo, little by little started talking in the organizations of my field of work. And I would travel and do public speaking and doing that work little by little. And that's how I developed the consulting business.
You make a good point there. Is HR does have kind of I don't want to say a stigma, but there is a certain box, right? That people are like, oh,
Yeah.
HR, they're the bad people. If you get called in, there isn't that trust. So a lot of what you were doing for consulting, was it to kind of help HR in the way that they kind of manage conflicts?
Mm-hmm.
Or were you more, like, now that I kind of think about it, almost like attorneys? Sometimes there's mediators, right?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of help and negotiators. So I'm just kind of curious what your role in that consultancy was, and kind of what's the difference between like a mediator and negotiator versus someone like you who's doing conflict resolution. Would this be, would what you do be the step first so that you kind of avoid going to like a negotiator or a mediator?
Mm-hmm. Well, the field of work that I'm at, it's called alternative dispute resolution. And if you can envision this as an umbrella of different skill sets that go underneath this field. One of them is mediation. And by that means there's like a distinct type of mediation processes. And attorneys gravitate to becoming mediators because they know that sometimes people do not have enough money to pay for attorneys all the time, or they don't want to end up landing in a court system. And the mediation that they do is very evaluative. The type of mediation that I gravitate towards, it's more transformational, more about working with the human condition, not about dividing assets, gadgets, and things, but rather than how are we going to transform the relationship so that you guys can continue working together? How are we going to restore the perhaps the wrongdoing in order to be able to establish ways of how to move forward in order to work together, right?
Okay.
Which is very distinct than what HR will do sometimes, right? They're more about policy and procedures. Did you break policy? You didn't break policy? Okay, what else can we do with you? Because if you're not happy here at work, it's best for us just to let you go, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty much that. Versus in the work that I do is I have those difficult conversations with the parties involved, and I help them through pathways of how to get to a process of restoration so they can continue working together. And the company wins because then when an employee sees that the company takes takes charge of bringing a neutral to resolve the situation, and that these individuals in the workplace feel comfortable enough to open up with me, because what the work that I do doesn't require me to document everything. HR documents every single thing. I don't, because of the nature of the work that I come and do, right? So right up there, people feel very comfortable. They know that this is a voluntary process, nobody's forcing them, and that the person that they're going to be talking to does not have any stake in the company's hierarchies, right? I'm just coming as a neutral. So that really helps for people to open up, to be able to humanize the conflict and be able to resolve it from that standpoint.
Okay. And then as you're doing a lot of this right now, or at least at that point, you're doing the consultancy to kind of do the conflict once something's already happened. But are you also at the same time teaching HR and probably teaching this person how to potentially avoid to the point where you're having to go to HR versus policy? Because now, what could we have done with the manager? Is it something that the manager could have, or the leader, could we have taught them a skill to kind of avoid getting it to this point? Or even the employees, right? Because it doesn't necessarily have to come from the top down. It could be from the bottom up. I could be an employee, understand these skills so that I'm dealing with somebody, either a coworker, a peer, or somebody above me, to kind of be able to handle those same types of situations.
Yeah, that's what I talk about in the book Conflict IQ that I developed. It's a methodology that it would be ideal for companies to really invest to develop this conflict IQ in people from any level of the organization. Because imagine, as a customer, for example, coming into, let's say, a store or any place that you go. And if an employee has the ability to de-escalate situations and be able to resolve the issue with that person, imagine the work that they're not bringing into HR, their managers, their supervisors, because they're taking charge and they're working to de-escalate situations, right? And that helps overall all the organization, right? So the ideal, it would be that every single person in the work would learn these skills. Yeah, that would be the ideal. But having leaders that understand conflict resolution, HR, having these other mechanisms that they can use aside from their policies and procedures can be ideal, again, to de-escalate situations that perhaps could have landed in a formal complaint, or there has been already a formal complaint, and how can we de-escalate? Sometimes for HR it's very difficult to see that happening, but I do it in my day-to-day work. I have gone to organizations in where formal complaints have already been filed, and with the work that I do, sometimes people will remove those formal complaints and not continue. A formal complaint takes about 90 days in order to investigate, which is a lot of time, a lot of resource. And in the meantime, it's almost 3 months in where people are alienated and they're upset with each other because one person said something about the other person, and then it escalated the situation in order to investigate the other person. Once they do the investigation, HR does not do anything, and then just tell the employee, I cannot tell you anything because it's confidential, and just know that we're just going to take care of it. But the employee sometimes feels that HR didn't do anything, right? Most likely than not. Versus in the work that I do is I work with the human side of people, right? I work with them in order to have those difficult conversations, in order to see whether if there's pathways in order to resolve the situation, in order to continue working together, right? Because you might have two very good employees that might cost you a lot of money to replace, and they're having a human interaction that didn't go well, right? So wouldn't it be better to be able to find mechanisms for those individuals to be able to work together and be able to dialogue and come out with resolution? It would be for the betterment of the company, for for the bottom line of the company, right? And then employees that see that companies take care of building more inclusion, most likely employees become more loyal because they see that the company cares for them instead of just investigating and trying to get rid of the cheapest employees that will cost in order to replace them, right? Because it costs money in order to fire people and replace people. And usually what it tends to happen is that HR will side more with leadership because it will cost more. And the fact that they earn more is more likelihood that they can go out into the outside world and hire an attorney, right? So all of those factors take into place while HR is trying to analyze risk, right?
Mhm.
And that's how we see it happening.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So then now, as you started your career and you opened up your consultancy and you're starting with kind of these HR departments, how are you continuing to kind of develop and, get into more of these, different companies, right? Because at some point, and I don't remember how long it is or how short, but at some point you start working and realize that there's a need for it within, like tech industry, and it's very specific in what they're looking for, right? Because you mentioned at the very beginning, right? These are very tech focused, very knowledge based, and that human element isn't always there. And that's something, and I think that's part of the reason that we kind of came in contact is I started sharing a lot about like, hey, you can have all the technical skills in the world, but if you can't deal with people, that kind of limits you as an individual or even as a leader, because a lot of times people who are knowledgeable, they think that, well, this person's very smart, let's put them in a leadership role, but they don't thrive there because they don't have the skill set to be able to go ahead and do that. Could they learn it? Yes, but they're not given that. And it might be a little bit easier now, but at that point in time, like, at least when I remember kind of going through, it wasn't as prevalent to just be like, well, I'm going to go on YouTube, or there's tons of books, or maybe there are, but I was more, well, I know how to go get my Cisco CCNA, or I know how to get my Microsoft certs, or, my VMware certs, like all these different things. So how are you kind of building your consultancy? And I don't know if at this point you're still in San Diego or if you've already moved to the Silicon Valley, but kind of, kind of what transpires to, help you get to that point.
Yeah, well, I was in San Diego when I was working for the University of UC, San Diego, University of California, San Diego. And building my career there, I found that there was a stagnation in that university. I couldn't grow anymore. And I was already teaching at a university level. I was teaching undergraduate, master degree students. And yet I wasn't seeing my progression in the ability to integrate my degree while I was already doing my consulting work outside too. And eventually the opportunity showed up that the Alameda Superior Court was looking for someone to help them develop a mediation program that somehow they tried to start, and for many years they have it dormant. So I saw the opportunity. It is, I always make the metaphor as the surfers when they go to Hawaii or they go to different places in the world because they want to ride the highest wave.
Right.
For me, going into the court system and help them create a mediation program was the ultimate area of my career, right? It's like, wow, I'm gonna go into the court system. And by the way, I want to learn why sometimes the mediations programs don't work very well. Maybe I can be of influence for these programs to really work, because a lot of people do not know that there are these mediation programs in the court system, right? And the most that we learn when we go through a divorce is that supposedly a mediator helps to mediate the child custody. And there is an erroneous information about these individuals because they're social workers. They're not trained in mediation. But for a while they were calling them mediators, right? But they're not. They're not skilled in mediation, right? They're just social workers that decide where the child is going to be best in a couple of hours. So the mediation program was going more to be built in the small claim courts and in certain courts that people go in and and try to sue one another. And that helps the judges to be able to reduce the amount of cases they have by offering a voluntary process of a mediation, and with that mediation be able to give that information to the judge of what is it, not what happened in the mediation, but what is it that they decided to do, and how they were going to work through the situation, or how they were going to divide the money, or who was going to pay what, right? So I went into the Superior Court. I moved here from San Diego, from living all my life there. I decided to move up here, and I start working with the Superior Court in building that program. And it was amazing for me, just having that opportunity to be able to work with judges and be able to work with them in order to develop a program that would fit the Superior Court system. And then be able to start educating people about the mediation programs that we had, and then be able to train mediators to be able to do these mediations inside the court system. And with that, there were mediators that were attorneys that wanted to go into that field of mediation. And there were neutral people just like me that study to become mediators from a neutral perspective. And they were also doing and coming in and doing mediation. And I was able to train them to develop the whole program and leave it running for the court system to continue using it.
And
that's how I moved here to the Bay Area.
To the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And how is it that what did you find out was what stalled that within the court system? Mm-hmm. Was it someone that just kind of didn't take the initiative? Because it sounds like apart from conflict resolution, and kind of putting people together, mm-hmm. you also seem like you are also a problem solver. Like you like that challenge of like, okay, these people can't get along, right? It's one thing to kind of conflict resolution, but it's also like, would it be fair to say that it's the challenge of how can I get them to agree upon something? They're never going to see exactly eye to eye or like be 100% happy, but they'll agree that, okay, this is the path forward.
Well, it is because of the studies of this field of work. The baseline of this field is in the study of psychology, sociology, and anthropology. So when you get to learn the aspects of how people's psychology works, of how the neurology of conflict resolution happens in the brain, of how people influence one another through sociology, and understanding that prior to having a legal system in the United States, people were resolving problems on tribes. And anthropologists brought into the light, how is it that people in tribes used to resolve conflict, right? And brought that to the light of the field, right? So by understanding humanity, it is not necessarily that I'm interested on problem solving. I'm more interested in the possibility, in the capacity of helping people to transform, to be able to see things from different perspectives. Through the process of doing this master's degree, I also studied coaching in neuro-linguistic programming, because I knew that these areas will work very well hand in hand to help people to see things from different perspectives. And that gives me a whole advantage, because by helping people to get them to think, by me asking them key questions, perhaps helping them to position themselves in other people's shoes, I help them to see things from a different perspective and be able to help them to lift the level of consciousness to other levels in where things can be resolved. And that idea didn't come necessarily from me. Albert Einstein said that you cannot resolve problems from the level of consciousness where the problem was created, right? Or from the level of thinking from where the problem was created. And that is part of the basis of the work in Conflict IQ. that if you work with individuals to be able to perhaps see things from a different perspective, be able to understand their emotions and how their emotions play a role in the situation. Because people tend to say it's everybody else's fault except you, right? And even though that it's so, what is it that you're thinking or the way that you are showing up into the world or with people that it's allowing that experience to come to you, right? And that is what really fascinates me, because this work can become very addicting when you see transformation on people. And even though that it is for a certain amount of hours that I'm working with people, I know that the experience that they have whenever they realize that they can resolve conflict, that they never thought that they could resolve it because they don't see eye to eye with other people, that changed people's life. That gives them an opportunity to see that indeed things can be resolved. And we don't live in a society where we are taught that, right? We live in a society that we, we glorify conflict. We glorify people fighting. We see it in sports. We see it in the reality shows. So in reality, humanity does not have a lot of people that give us good examples of conflict resolution. And the majority of people learn their conflict resolution skills as they're growing from the age of 0 to about 7, where psychology says that people by that time pretty much develop their personality styles, right? Because when a child is brand new into this world, they're learning from other human beings how to navigate world. Mm-hmm. They're not interested in learning how to read, write, math. They're just observing humans and in absorbing from that how to navigate world. And if they happen to have good conflict resolvers, negotiators, their parents, their teachers, their grandparents, people that were around them, they might be able to absorb very useful skills, right? And those are the skills that they will be using throughout their life. And especially because we know that throughout the educational system, if you don't happen to have a degree in what I do, or perhaps a degree in psychology, anthropology, you might not be able to catch other skills and upgrade the skills that you learned when you were little, or add to these skills if they were good skills to be able to add to it.
And now I'm starting to see the parallels in, it's very similar to technology, right? If you're just within your one discipline, mm-hmm. It's very difficult to be, I'm not saying it can't be done, but to be very successful. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you kind of took that same approach. Like if you were focused only on conflict resolution, mm-hmm. say, okay, this is it. This is all I'm going to do. You could be successful, but then you're limiting, or you're almost kind of putting a ceiling on yourself. But by going through and saying, hey, there's parts of it in sociology and anthropology and psychology and all these different areas. It's the same thing like within technology. Like I can be the best networking person, but I would be even better. Again, I don't have to be a specialist in, software mm-hmm. and infrastructure and all these different areas, but having that understanding can kind of help tie it all together. So I'm starting to see, at least parallels within, the two different fields.
Let's talk about a little bit of AI and how AI has been revolutionized to be able to think like a human. And in AI, there is what they call NLP, right? They call it neuro-linguistic, not programming, but they call it neuro-linguistic, right? Mm-hmm. And it's the pattern of the language and how you use the pattern of the language to enact actions on other people, right? So in order to develop software, you also have to learn about human being, how human being functions from the inside out, right? It's the same thing with helping people to resolve conflict and helping them to negotiate, helping them to restore relationships. I see it very similar because in In technology, you have to learn how the interface, the human that is going to be using that interface, is going to interact with that in order to be able to build better software, better systems, right?
Right.
It's very similar.
You touched on AI there, and do you think, I mean, obviously it takes, training it and being able to do that, but a lot of the conflict resolution, a lot of the work you do you see a point in time where that could be almost like a stepping stone, right? Maybe they develop maybe you develop it, or maybe somebody you work with develops something that says, okay, I'm a business and I have this technology that I'm already using. Can't I create something that would create this this conflict resolution, this intelligence, IQ, to go through and say, all right, here's the situation. Again, it's not going to be perfect, but at least kind of give them as a starting point to kind of go through and not replace what you do, but almost either be a starting point or kind of help give you better information and say, okay, hey, here's what we've done. We went through AI, we did a lot of this. Here's what it came up with, and we still have a problem.
Remember what I mentioned about the umbrella of the field work that I do? There is already something in place for that. There is an area called what is called dispute system design, right? Going into organizations and studying the issues that people are having and helping to develop a dispute system design that will be adapted into the organization to resolve issues. It's part of this process. Now, they took that and they integrated with online dispute resolution. And there was somebody here in Silicon Valley already that helped eBay to develop what is called dispute system design. His last name is Rules, Colin Rules. He was the one that helped. Somehow he got a hold of understanding mediation and brought it into existence into eBay, because in eBay you're not physically interacting with people, but they're people from the outside world, not from the company, that they're selling products, right? And there's going to be conflict. Some people are not going to be happy with the product, or they're going to be upset that they found the product elsewhere cheaper. And there's always going to be that type of problem. So in order to resolve those human conflicts that people were having while they were purchasing these products from other people, they developed the online dispute resolution systems, in where you have people trained that are in the computer trying to help people that purchase products from each other to resolve issues with one another. And then you have the facilitator that it's an employee from eBay supporting the whole system. And then you have it on Amazon. You have it in many companies already, but perhaps you have come across with that, but you have never thought that it was part of this field of conflict resolution, dispute resolution, mediation, restorative practice.
That's very interesting. You're right. I have seen a lot of those types of systems and just never realized that that's what it was.
Yeah.
So within the tech industry, right? So at some point you're in Silicon Valley and you're working with these companies. From an individual standpoint, or even from a company, what are some of the skills that you see that we're not equipped with, that, if you had to give, say, 2 or 3 points, right? Because it's a lot of information, but
Yes.
2 or 3 things that somebody could say that you would say, this is what you should work on, or here's something to be aware of. Like it's, maybe advice you would give me. Hey, Manuel, as you're going through, you're starting to get in these leadership positions, these are the 2 or 3 things you should be aware of and start to develop, and it will make your life and your job just that much easier.
Yeah, I always tell to my students and people that I train, because one of the things that I can share with you is that, I don't always get called in when the conflict already happened. I get called in as a potential preventative process to provide training, right? Or perhaps already the situation is happening and they need somebody to come in, or perhaps the problem happened, it created the disruption on people, and then I come in and do more restorative work, right? But going back to your question as to what is it that will be the advice that I can give someone, it's about getting to know yourself, asking yourself the question, how is it that I really learn how to resolve conflict? How have I been doing it so far? And do I get good outcomes? Maybe perhaps sometimes I get a good outcome, sometimes I don't. Do I tend to be a person that avoid conflict at any cost? Do I tend to be a person that want to win at any cost? Do I tend to be a person that likes to collaborate all the time, but it doesn't work because it takes a lot of work? And sometimes there are situations that collaboration might not be the right fit because we need to make decisions right away. Do I tend to accommodate? And do I get tired of accommodating all the time? Right? So these are styles of people, skills of how to perhaps deal with situations, with conflicts and inner conflict, outside conflict, intergroup conflict, right? By getting to know yourself better, it's kind of like you're opening up a door of creating awareness about what are the skills that you already possess on you, right? What are the ones that you learned from whom? From my dad, from my mom, even though perhaps I saw my teacher in elementary and she or he taught me how to listen to the other student. So starting to figure it out, what are the skills that you already have, that you do it with your eyes closed, right? And that opens up the curiosity as to wanting to learn more. If I know this skill, but it doesn't work 100% of the time, what are other skills that I need to learn, right? Obviously, having empathic listening can be another one, right? We tend to listen the majority of time with the idea of what are we going to respond, instead of being physically present there to allow the person to be able to tell you all the information that they want to share with you, and then be able to create a space in which that individual feels like you're really, really paying attention to them, right? So those will be some of the skills. Becoming a conflict IQ leader requires what I call meta skills. It's just not one skill. It's several skills, right? And then be able to introspect and learn who you are, and be able to create like what I call, the step before conflict intelligence, the emotional intelligence. Be able to understand how do you function from the within out, knowing how you react to emotions, right? Because if you're a very reactive person and your fast brain, the one that is equipped in our brain to be rapidly acting because for whatever reason is protecting you, and you don't have that well trained in order to use your analytical brain to be able to realize what is going on in here. Why am I feeling this way? How can I react differently? Because the way that I react in anger might not lead me to the outcomes that I want in this relationship with people. So by understanding yourself better, it's part of the process. And then eventually you're opening up yourself to wanting to be curious, to learning more skills.
And I think you're right. So recently, within the last few months, I read the book Crucial Conversations.
Very famous one.
Yeah, it's a very famous one. And it does make me start to think about this. It was a little bit about conflict resolution, but it's really just being able to have those conversations. And they do talk about like understanding how you process things and how you react to conversations, right? So if there is an argument, what are you doing? And and I don't remember where I heard it, but it's something that I start to think about a lot within conversations, or within, different situations. It's the saying is that you want to be the thermostat, not the thermometer.
Mm.
right? Because you talked about like, how do you react? If I'm
Mhm.
very reactive, like, okay, I'm being the thermometer in that I'm taking the temperature. So whatever that temperature is, like if you
Mhm.
get upset and mad, am I raising to find out like where you're at? Am I raising it to that level?
Mhm.
If you're calm, am I going down? As opposed to being the thermostat.
Mhm.
I don't care if you're upset or you're here. I'm not matching that temperature to find out where you're at and kind of reaching to that level. Instead, I'm the thermostat. I'm saying, hey, I'm going to be 75. You can go up to 85 and be hot and upset. That's fine. I'm going to stay here.
Mhm.
And in doing that, and again, it's not perfect at it because it is something that I'm learning, but it does help to kind of help regulate the other person. But again, I'm not doing anything to
Mhm.
do it to that person, but it's myself. Hey, if I can stay calm, or if there's person's like very too relaxed, right? I've got to kind of bring the energy up a little bit, but understanding that. So it makes perfect sense to me that, oh, you have to start with yourself. How do I, am I the kind of person that's more of a collaborator? I think I feel like I try to collaborate more,
Mhm.
but I have moved away from being more of that accommodator. And that's something that over time I used to think like, oh, again, how you grow up. It's, well, I have to do that. I have to be that helpful person for everybody.
Yeah.
And at some point you realize that that doesn't work. I can collaborate, I can help, but then if you over accommodate to everybody, then, you end up in a situation that's,
Mhm.
probably not healthy.
Yeah. And like I said, building your toolbox and understanding that being an accommodator all the time, it's not a good thing, but then realizing when it's good, when it's a good choice to do, right? Sometimes being an avoider, sometimes it can be a good choice, but it's analyzing and understanding when, right? So, understanding of the different styles of how people deal with conflict, and then how do you can choose from one to another and recognize which one is your predominant one so that it doesn't win you and use it all the time. One of the things that you were mentioning about the thermometer, it reminded me about the understanding that we as human beings, we have this ability to have what it's called mirroring. When you have a person that is very, very upset, right? And let's say, for example, you become calmer, you influence people because then people want to mirror you back. And that plays a very huge role. And how do you manage the situation? Because like you said, that person can be in a high 70s, but if I'm the thermometer and I choose to be able to go lower, then I will be the influencer of the situation, because then I'm going to help that person by me calming down to be able to calm that person down, right? And that is called mirroring, right? How do you mirror people? You can mirror them also in the way that they're interacting with you. But if you know that they're interacting in a very high pitch and they're upset, how do you mirror them down? How do you influence them so they can calm down, right?
Are you seeing a lot more of this type of training and kind of knowledge sharing within the tech community? Because you mentioned it before that they're starting to integrate it more.
Mm-hmm.
What's the value that you would see in developing these types of skills? Maybe somebody who's watching and listening to this says, you know what though? I don't want to be in management. I don't need to learn that, right? Because I don't plan on leading people. I'm just going to be me. I'm going to be an individual contributor and I'm good to go.
Well, it all depends with that individual contributor. They're also going to be part of those project management groups anyways, right? And if they're going to be influential in a group and they perhaps would like to be in a position and where they can share their knowledge, their ideas, it is a good idea to learn these skills, because part of learning these skills helps you to become more assertive, we typically see in the technology world that we have a lot of people that are extremely introverted, right?
Yes.
And those introverts tend to be more on the side of avoidance. And when people constantly avoid situations, they're putting at risk their career. They're putting at risk their abilities to influence their innovations. So they pretty much put themselves in a risk of not being able to grow in their career. And maybe it's okay. They're earning pretty well. And maybe they don't want nothing else than that. But also take into consideration that you're going to be working, no matter what, you're going to be working with people, even if you're doing through an email, right? Even if you're just interacting through an email.
I think the timing's perfect because I recently put a post out there where, again, conflict resolution can also be influential, right? It's understanding how to deal with other people. Because one of the things that I learned, again, even as an individual contributor, maybe there's a project or there's a way that I want to move forward with, how we're configuring things, how we're doing things. And in order for me to kind of be able to influence, it's now looking back on it and kind of reflecting, there is some of that. I wouldn't say it could be conflict resolution, but it's kind of some of that peacemaking. Is I went through and said, okay, here's the problem, here's the solution, here's the outcome. Well, it's not just laying it out, but being able to kind of go through and say, hey, I think this is the direction we should go with this project. And here's why. Most people would be like, okay, yeah, no thanks, right? To your point, if I am less assertive, if I tend to avoid it, then I might get dismissed and people just think that, oh, it was a bad idea. And it's not so much that it's always a bad idea, it's just that it's not communicated properly or you didn't do the proper, I don't want to say the proper, but the right amount of work to be able to influence that and say, well, here's why. And, if we do it this way, here's the trade-offs, because there are trade-offs. It could be budget, it could be people resources through project management, through any number of areas where I can go through and say, hey, let's do this. Manager might say, well, we have 3 projects. If we do with your project, we can't do these other 2, or we can't do this one. And you kind of have to be able to go through and work with that person and probably work with various teams and say, okay, what's the importance of this? How do we work for there to be able to find, and it's not, I guess at that point it is a conflict, it's a conflict of interest, but working through those different skills that at that time doesn't seem like this is important, but now looking back, I can think of a number of situations like that where I'm like, oh, it would have been good to have those skills to be able to go through and negotiate or mediate my way to have the work that I'm doing have a bigger part within the organization.
Yeah, you said a key word in there. How do I influence people? How do I influence my ideas? Right? And that is part about learning the skills of people's skills, right? Learning that if you bring forth an idea in the way that you deliver the idea might come across of something that people will block you, right? Or might come across as you might not have the influence or the assertiveness to really demonstrate that is something that is of value to the organization, right? So learning how to influence is the ability to know in deep listening, getting yourself into the other people's shoes. Because if you want to influence an idea, but you're not listening to the ideas of others, they're not going to be receptive to hear your idea, right? But if you know that you have an idea, right? Let's say, for example, you already say, from A through C, I know how this can come through C and be able, but you don't want to come and impose that. But you come into the meetings and start asking questions. We see that there's this situation happening, this issue happening. What do you guys think can be the solution? How can we work on these together so that we can come out with solutions of how to work together. And when you approach people in that way, they're going to be open and receptive. If you want to come and push something towards them, an idea, it's going to affect their values, their beliefs, and they're going to become closed down, right? But you want people to be open. Once I always call it like a dance when you're dancing tango, right? You both are leading each other. You're not just leading the person, you're leading each other. And when you come in and you bring the openness of the communication and allow the other person to step forward into that conversation, and they're open and receptive, then you can bring little by little some ideas. What do you think about this? How do you think about that? And through those questions, you already perhaps prompting them to think that your solution can be the solution. But in the same dance, you're also in a position of learning, because you might think that your idea, it's 100% good, right? But how about if you forgot or you didn't think about different aspects? And that gives you an opportunity also to learn, right? So that when you present your idea, these people will be more receptive. And you're also inviting them to be part of the idea. And when people feel part of something and they feel that they're part of the idea in the collaboration process, most likely than not, you're gonna gain more tokens, more yes, this we can do this, right? It is very difficult for the egos of people just to come and push ideas into people, right? Mm-hmm. And even though that it could be the best idea that you can have, sometimes people's egos will shut down things down.
And I like what you said there is first coming and starting asking them questions like, hey, what do you think about this? You're trying to influence, what it is that you think is going to be a good solution, but then realizing that it's not all just influence one way, right? Mm-hmm. You might be learning and you might not realize things. So and this comes up a lot, is not listening to respond, but listening to really understand. Mm-hmm. Because then, to your point, if you're really paying attention and you're like, hey, what do you think about this? If it's always just your idea, people are going to catch on.
Yeah. People, I always say this, people are spirits inside a body. And scientifically, they have already proved that when you're already thinking about something and you haven't enacted, people have the ability to know somehow, because we're like little antennas. We're like cell phones, right? And that has been proven already, that you might be able to think about doing something and somehow the computer already realized that you thought about it and you're planning the next step. It's already up there. Yeah. I known this for a long time because I study neurolinguistic programming and I like to read a lot of neuroscience, right? So we are a spirit in the body, and we have more information that we can verbalize. And when you're trying to utilize the questions, and people can feel through you that the questions are a form of manipulation, mm-hmm. People immediately feel it. They don't trust you, right? You lose people's trust. But when you come genuinely with curiosity and people feel that you're coming from that angle, people trust you and people open up. And that is where you can start planting the seed of your idea to see whether they will be able to and receptive and open to work with your idea. Right. And then inviting them to co-participate. And when you do that, you influence the process. If you are flexible with that, you become the catalyst of the process, the system, right?
Yeah. And it completely makes sense, because you're right. There have been situations where you can tell when people are asking those questions, and you're just like, you're asking the question to get your answer, not you're asking the question to get an answer or my answer or, the group's answer. you already know what you're looking for. You just want to ask it instead of telling it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very interesting.
And that is called manipulation.
Yeah.
Right? And a lot of people does it, but sometimes they're not doing it from a standpoint that, that they know it, that they're manipulating, but they're just so eager to push their idea that they don't realize that they're coming across that way.
Right.
Right?
Interesting. So I know you've been very gracious and asked or answered a lot of the questions that I had. I just want to give you the opportunity. Is there anything, about the type of work that you do, anything within your career that I haven't asked and you're like, Manuel, this is something that I really wanted to talk about, but we didn't get a chance to just because the conversation didn't lead there. So I want to give you the opportunity to kind of bring up a topic of anything.
Well, I would say that wherever there's two humans, there's always going to be conflict. And I had the opportunity to work with many industries, and every industry has their own particular issues, right? And on top of that, the humanity that works around that. But it's just very interesting that companies and leaders in organizations, they still have a negative denotation about the word conflict. And it's something very natural to human beings. And sometimes we try to hide it and say, no, conflict doesn't exist in a company. And it is very interesting to see that, that kind of like rejection to the real nature of humanity. Whenever there's more than one people, there are always going to be conflict. Whenever there's one people, you're going to have internal conflict, right? And then the idea behind that, why don't we learn to normalize more the idea that conflict exists? And how do we transform the conflict from a toxic emotional conflict to more of a cognitive conflict that builds upon ideas, builds upon innovation, builds upon inclusivity? Because when people get together without offending one another, without accusing one another, without blaming one another, what you create, it's a diversity of thinking that would allow for more innovation and to be able to serve the community as a whole, right? When you're open and receptive to that. Because you might be able to have a product that might work very well in the United States, but if you don't work with other cultures and you understand how do they resolve issues, and you don't understand how to work culturally with those individuals, that itself creates a lot of conflict, not understanding people's culture. But if you learn that this is important and that is part of humanity, then you create more diversity of thinking, and you might be able to transform products that not only work here in the United States, but they work elsewhere in the world, right? What I'm trying to say with this, that these skills are extremely valuable to the bottom line of companies.
I think you're right. We tend to avoid it. So I think there's a lot more conflict avoidance than conflict resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And just the way that you were saying it is kind of going through, and this diversity of thinking, it's no different than saying the word problem solving, right? It's yes, they're different. Like a problem and a conflict, they are different, but they're similar, right? How is it that we're okay with constantly solving problems, right? Like, oh, I ran into a problem and hey, let's work together and let's solve this. If we kind of take that same approach from a conflict standpoint, I think you're right. I think we would be in a much better point, is instead of going through like, oh, I don't want to talk to this person because I know there's going to be a conflict, and you keep doing it and keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Why avoid this conflict multiple times a day? If you're working with somebody, right, and you know that it's going to cause a conflict, instead of avoiding it multiple times a day, every day during the week, why not just take the time to go through and say, hey, how do we work through this? How do we get past this so that, one, you don't probably build that anxiety in yourself to say, oh my God, I don't like dealing with this. Or I don't want to go to this meeting because, again, it's affecting probably the quality of the work that you're doing. But if you go through and you're open to say, hey, you know what? I know that there's going to be a problem. I know that there's going to be a conflict. How do we work through this? Find a solution. I think the next time it comes up, and I'm sure you would agree that it's going to take time, right? That's not going to be like, hey, we solved this conflict in 20 minutes. So from now on, it's going to be super fast. Like, it might take some time, right? Like, it's not going to happen probably in one session. It's going to be multiple sessions, but then eventually the idea is that you'll learn how that person thinks, how they operate, how the business, how this group, right? Because then a lot of times it might be a group, like you said, in a project. Eventually they'll get faster and faster at resolving those conflicts and coming up with better products and better ideas.
Right. And if we don't address the human conflict from its core, it tends to be, hide under the rug and thinking that it's just going to go away. And it doesn't, because it keeps, it's stacking until people explode. And then you physically see that they're already screaming into each other, or they're already, upset with each other. And the majority of the times, the conflict didn't happen there. It happened a while ago. It happened perhaps at the time that, you mentioned something, you were coming from home and you were dealing with some personal issues, and you miscommunicated something, and that didn't clear out, right? And the other person started unliking you, right? Because it never gave the opportunity to open up and establish more conversation with you, right? And in situations like that, keep stacking and stacking and stacking, and all of a sudden people don't like each other. MIT in 2023, when they were doing more research study as to how to bring people back from home to work in companies, one of the research studies showed that that people didn't want to go back to companies because they didn't want to deal with the politics. And the politics, what they call politics, is that people sometimes don't get along well with other employees. They don't get along well with their supervisors, their managers, right? And that is what they call politics. They don't want to be in environments in where cliques are happening, and cliques create a lot of power over one person or other people in the workplace. And if we don't watch out for that toxic culture in the organization, then we're not going to have very inclusive environments in where people come to work for what they're hired to come to work for. Instead, people come into work and they feel like they are going to a war zone, and where they have to defend themselves, and where they have to up their gear, right? And eventually, if people are functioning at that level, it affects not only their mind, but every single bodily in your body. Every single cell gets affected. And when you have people in a state of fleet, flight, and flight mode, they're not going to be in a space of creativity, innovation, and productivity. And on top of that, if people continue to be in that state for a prolonged amount of time, people start developing cortisol levels that affects other organs in the body, and that employee is going to become more absent to work. And they're going to be sick. They're not going to feel well. Their mind is going to be foggy. So if companies don't see these skill sets as part of a risk management opportunity, they're losing out. I think that they're losing out. Sometimes companies come to me and it's like, we didn't have this in our budget, because they're putting it in the budget of learning development, right? They're putting this work in the learning and development. It's great to have it, we have it, but if not, that's the first thing that it gets cut when budgets are cut. But these skill sets should be seen in the risk management line item, right? How can we mitigate risk that employees are healthy enough to come to work for us, and they can be in their best state of being in order to do the work that they're here to do, you know? For a couple of years ago, we have been hearing people bring all yourself to work, right? Bring all yourself to work. And they don't realize that the reality of things that will be in a better effect for companies, it's bringing your healthy self to work. And then how do we support you here in order to continue to be healthy mentally so that you can be in a state of creation, productivity, and innovation?
I am so thankful that you came on and we were able to kind of make this happen, because you've shared a lot of good insights. And again, it's not all technology based. And I think that that's a good thing, right? It's just making people aware of these aren't the things that when people go through a boot camp or to try to pick up skill sets to try and get a job. Okay, maybe the fact that you came in and said, hey, I have conflict resolution on my resume, probably not going to help you, but it is going to help me make you successful once you're in that role and as you start to progress within your career. So again, I'm very thankful for you coming on, and I definitely, you have the book, The Conflict Intelligence Quotient, and I will make sure to kind of link that in the show notes so that people who are interested in kind of learning more about, this area of work and what you do, so that they can go ahead and find you. So thank you. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure coming and visit you here and have the opportunity to not only talk to you, but your audience as well. Thank you.
And for everybody watching and listening, I hope you found this as insightful as I did. I know that there's a lot of what Yvette was talking about that I wish I would have known earlier on in my career, and definitely looking forward to kind of learning more about this area and helping it be successful from this point forward. So with that, continue to plug in and download the knowledge, and until next time, thank you.